Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Back on June 28th, 2023, which was nearly 18 months ago, I released a video that I had entitled, "More Evidence Star Wars as a Franchise is Dead." And in that video, I explained my rationale for that pronouncement, that Star Wars as a franchise under the radical feminist leadership of Kathleen Kennedy is dead because it is no longer able to sustain itself financially due to a lack of paying fans and normies alike. At the time, I focused much of my rationale on Lucasfilm's diminishing returns for the 5 Star Wars movies that it had produced since Disney had purchased the franchise from George Lucas, as well as the completely lackluster and in most cases nearly non-existent sales of novels that Lucasfilm had published as part of what it calls the High Republic, which Lucasfilm defines as an era within the Star Wars universe that precedes the events of Star Wars I: The Phantom Menace by a few hundred years. And by nearly non-existent sales, I mean sales of individual novels in the tens of thousands of copies. Not millions of copies or even hundreds of thousands of copies, but only tens of thousands of copies. So there hasn't been any broad interest in the High Republic era, and very few people are actually all that familiar with it. So the diminishing returns for their 5 Star Wars movies, combined with the negligible amount of interest for the High Republic novels, were both evidence of growing apathy within the broader Star Wars fandom, as well as normies alike. And the complete rejection of the very disappointing 3rd season of The Mandalorian that had premiered a few months before I had recorded that video was additional evidence for the growing apathy. And mind you, I had released that video well before the premiere of Dave Filoni's Ahsoka series on Disney+, which quickly became the franchise's least viewed series on the streaming platform until the June 4th premiere of The Acolyte, whose viewership numbers were even lower than those for Ahsoka. I watched each of those series in their entirety. And as each of them played out, I released numerous videos in which I reviewed each and every episode, as well as videos detailing their poor viewership numbers. And in the case of The Acolyte, which was created by Harvey Weinstein's former personal assistant Leslie Hetland, who had loosely based the series on the highly unpopular High Republic era, I had also released videos about how poorly the teasers and trailers for the show had been received, as well as videos about the attacks on Star Wars fans that began before the series premiered, which included unsubstantiated accusations of misogyny, racism, and homophobia, and continued while new episodes were premiering after the final episode had aired, and especially after the series was canceled this past August. And those unsubstantiated accusations are continuing to be made against the fandom to this day. And a lot of the recent accusations are originating from Kathleen Kennedy herself, actress Amanda Stenberg, Leslie Hetland, and most recently from actor Jung-jae. But at no point have any of them provided any evidence to support their claims. If you watched the video that I had recently released on December 7th about the newest trailer for Snow White being heavily ratioed, then what I just described is no different from what the Forbes article that I quoted in that video said about Hollywood's continuously recurring excuse of blaming the audience for their failures, to include name-calling. So do I in any way believe that the Star Wars fandom is as rotten as these individuals have attempted to claim, while presenting absolutely zero evidence to support it? No, absolutely not. And hopefully most people don't either. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please leave a comment, please subscribe to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! Overall, Ahsoka was a very boring series for a variety of reasons, but it wasn't a completely awful series like The Acolyte was. And I went to great lengths to explain why The Acolyte was an awful series in the videos that I listed, and the very low audience scores for the series on the 3 main review aggregator websites, Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and Metacritic, are in full agreement with my personal assessments. But the next Disney Star Wars series premiered last week on Disney+, and it's entitled Skeleton Crew. I had released a video back on August 15th about the first trailer that had been released for Skeleton Crew, but I wasn't particularly intrigued by it since it essentially looked like the Goonies in outer space. Also, it had only been a few weeks since the final episode of The Acolyte had premiered, so the idea of watching yet another Star Wars series really didn't appeal to me at the time. And as of the time that I am recording this video, I have not yet watched any of the 3 episodes of Skeleton Crew that have been released so far. But the focus of this video is on the show's viewership numbers. So we do have an idea as to how many people watched the first 2 episodes that were released together on December 2nd, thanks to a company called Luminate, which has a partnership with Variety to share their previous week's viewership numbers. So instead of having to wait at least a month for Nielsen's viewership numbers for last week, we have numbers from Luminate. And guess what? Things aren't looking too good at the moment for Skeleton Crew because when Luminate released its estimated viewership numbers for the week of November 29th through December 5th, the estimated total minutes viewed for Skeleton Crew isn't even listed in Luminate's top 10 most streamed original shows, which were split between 4 streamed shows from Netflix, 4 from Paramount+, 1 from Amazon Prime, and 1 from Peacock. In other words, there's absolutely nothing from Disney+, which includes Skeleton Crew. And what does that tell us? While we don't know what the actual total number of streamed minutes is for the first 2 episodes of Skeleton Crew, what we do know is that it's less than the reported total number of streamed minutes for the 10th most streamed show listed by Luminate. And that would be The Day of the Jackal on Peacock, whose total streamed minutes are estimated to be 332.3 million minutes. This means that the first 2 episodes of Skeleton Crew during the week that they premiered on Disney Plus were streamed for less than 332.3 million minutes. And that's significantly lower than not only the 488 million minutes that the first 2 episodes of The Acolyte were streamed when they premiered back in June, it's also a lot lower than Disney's least streamed Star Wars series during its premiere, the 389 million minutes that the first episode of The Book of Boba Fett was streamed during its premiere on Disney Plus at the end of December of 2021. Now, you do need to bear in mind that when The Book of Boba Fett premiered, that was only a single 37-minute and 40-second long episode. But when Skeleton Crew premiered, that was 2 episodes whose combined runtimes were 1 hour and 15 minutes, or 75 minutes. So as shown in this chart, the equivalent number of households, if they had watched the entire premiere episode for The Book of Boba Fett, would be around 10.3 million households, which is obtained by dividing the total number of streamed minutes by the total runtime. But for Skeleton Crew, knowing that the total number of minutes viewed for its premiere week is less than 332.3 million minutes, we also know that the equivalent number of households that watched would be less than 4.4 million, which is at least a 57.1% drop in households as compared with The Book of Boba Fett's premiere week. And it's even less than the equivalent number of households that tuned in to watch The Acolyte during its premiere week by at least 26.67%. So what do we now know about Disney's newest Star Wars series entitled Skeleton Crew? It has the worst premiere week as compared with any previous Star Wars series on Disney+, including The Acolyte, which is rather sad actually, but not completely surprising when you consider the following. Of what appears to be the show's 5 principal characters, only one is an adult, the character named Jod Na Naywood as played by Jude Law. The other 4 principal characters being children might be making the show less appealing to an adult audience, especially since nothing is really known about them ahead of time. Further, it doesn't appear that either Disney or Lucasfilm spent much money to market Skeleton Crew. And finally, this show premiered only 6 months after that truly abysmal show The Acolyte premiered, and that show was utterly rejected by normies and the vast majority of the Star Wars fandom. What Disney and Lucasfilm clearly don't get is that both apathy and bad reputations are cumulative. By continuing to release mostly lackluster, poorly written, and increasingly woke content ahead of Skeleton Crew, even if this show is better than the most recent shows that preceded it, especially The Acolyte, those previous shows have left such a bitter taste in people's mouths, they're clearly just not that interested in watching Skeleton Crew. And I genuinely don't believe that the fact that the show looks so much like a rehash of the 1985 movie The Goonies has actually helped it. So even though the audience scores for Skeleton Crew on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and Metacritic of 81%, 7.2, and 5.7 respectively are all significantly higher than the similar audience scores for The Acolyte, which are 18%, 4.2, and 3.1 respectively, hardly anyone wants to watch Skeleton Crew. So the same type of diminishing returns in box office that Disney's Star Wars movies were experiencing in movie theaters is happening again, but now with its diminishing viewership numbers for its Star Wars shows streaming on Disney+. And all of this only further exemplifies the growing apathy that most people clearly now have towards the Star Wars franchise as a whole. And the person most responsible for this is none other than Kathleen Kennedy, the person who has been president of Lucasfilm for 12 years now. So I sure hope that Disney shareholders are happy that yet another costly flop has premiered on Disney+. And just as I had talked about at the beginning of this video, all of this is just more evidence that the Star Wars franchise is dead. And the person most responsible for killing Star Wars is Kathleen Kennedy. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to each and every one of you who has subscribed to support this channel. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and Blue Sky by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.